Have you ever walked by a neighbor's home and felt a strange chill, wondering if something dark might be hidden behind closed doors? Today, we invite you into a quiet Florida suburb, where lush palm trees and well-kept lawns decorate the streets, and families greet each other with warm smiles, or so it would seem. The Johnson household, by all appearances, represents everything we believe about the American dream. A comfortable home, two happy children, and a couple whose life together glimmers with promise. But the truth can be far darker than anyone dares to imagine. Before we share more, please subscribe to True Crime Atlas, where we keep you informed and engaged with stories that pull back the curtain on unsettling secrets. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a tragic case that still sends shivers through those who dare to talk about it. Stay with us. And remember, you never truly know what lies behind a perfect smile. It started with a single missing persons report, made in a hushed tone on a humid Florida morning. Sarah Johnson and her two children, Emma and Noah, were nowhere to be found. Her co-worker at the local daycare had first noticed her absence. Sarah, known for her punctuality and sweet laugh, had not shown up to work, a place she never missed, not even on her sickest days. Within hours, the rumor mill buzzed among the neighbors. Mark Johnson, a tall, somewhat distant presence in the community, appeared anxious but pleaded that he had nothing to hide and no idea where his family had gone. Nobody wanted to believe that the happy, smiling wife and her darling children might be in harm's way. After all, the Johnson home always seemed warm, inviting, and well-maintained. But this was just a veneer over painful secrets. If you walked past the Johnson house a week before the disappearance, you might have heard raised voices echoing through the walls. The tension had grown within the household over the last 6 months, sparked by Mark's disastrous investment. He had channeled nearly all of their family savings into a business venture that failed, leaving the family in mounting debt. The strain forced him to let go of certain luxuries: the fancy SUV, the family vacations, and the sense of security they had once taken for granted. Sarah, feeling the pressure of a failing marriage, tiptoed around Mark's temper. Each day, his control over their finances, their routines, and even their day-to-day communication seemed to tighten. Neighbors who lived on this serene street described Mark as polite but distant. He'd come out to wave courteously while tending to his lawn, never revealing much about his personal troubles. Sarah, on the other hand, was the open and friendly face of the family, always eager to help. She volunteered at church events and participated in community gatherings, never missing an opportunity to show her support. Their two children, Emma and Noah, wore bright smiles and enjoyed riding their bikes along the sidewalks. They would sometimes stop to pick flowers or wave at people passing by. Watching Emma and Noah, you never would have guessed the heartbreak and arguments they might have overheard inside those walls. It is said that secrets weigh heavy on the soul, pressing down until something finally cracks. Sarah felt it. She had tried to keep up appearances, but the cracks in her smile had begun to show. Friends recall her sitting at the school's pickup area, eyes red, drifting into deep thought. Occasionally they caught glimpses of bruises on her arms, and while Sarah tried to disguise them with long sleeves, Florida's heat made it difficult to hide for too long. At first she tried to dismiss them as minor mishaps, claiming she bumped into the door. But friends grew concerned. Whispers about the Johnson family's real struggles intensified. No one quite knew the full picture, but it was easy to suspect something was off. At Sarah's local daycare job, she confided in a colleague about her intention to leave Mark. She mentioned that the finances were dire, and she could no longer stand his eruptive temper and his need to control every aspect of their lives. The final straw, Sarah disclosed, was discovering Mark's infidelity. Her hands trembled as she shared her heartbreak with her close friend, Megan, behind the staff lounge door. Megan's voice quivered, telling Sarah she wasn't alone, and that help was possible. Yet Sarah, worried about her children and the possible fallout, hesitated. Fear of Mark's response kept her paralyzed. She believed she had no choice but to gather enough money in secret and plan for a safe escape, hoping her children would never have to see their father's dark side fully emerge. The night before Sarah's disappearance, an argument flared in the Johnson home. Neighbors later recalled hearing loud shouting echoing through the quiet street. The patches of conversation they could make out hinted at betrayal, money, and threats. It lasted long into the night, well past the time when the neighborhood typically fell silent. A newcomer to the area, Mrs. Carter, awakened at around 2 a.m. by the sound of shattering glass, peered through her window, only to see Mark's silhouette pacing. He appeared to be moving from one room to another, though from that distance, she couldn't discern his actions. At daybreak, Mrs. Carter woke again, only to see Mark in the driveway, pulling large, heavy bags into his truck. They seemed too heavy for ordinary trash or simple luggage, given the effort it took for Mark to hoist them. Suspicion gnawed at her, but she second-guessed herself after all. It was not exactly normal to barge into someone else's life. And yet, something in the air that morning felt wrong. Her eyes were locked on Mark's figure as she stood at her own window, uncertain if she should intervene, call the police, or confront him. She decided to watch a bit longer, unaware that she was witnessing the opening act of something tragic. A day later, Sarah did not arrive at work. The children did not come to school. The phone lines were oddly silent. No calls to friends, no updates. Mark stood before cameras and press, exuding the aura of a concerned father, tears brimming in his eyes, pleading for his family's safe return. The scene was heartbreakingly theatrical. Most neighbors believed him because few wanted to imagine something so dark. But Mrs. Carter remembered his face from the previous morning. The expression he wore, the methodical actions in that driveway, everything about it unsettled her. So, she made her choice and called the local police to share what she had witnessed. Investigators arrived at the Johnson residence. Mark cooperated, putting on the same sorrowful facade he had presented to the public. He allowed them to walk through the clean rooms, though the smell of bleach and cleaning products was thick in the air. Police found it somewhat odd but didn't have enough to arrest him on the spot. As they continued to look around, they noted unusual scratch marks on the garage floor and small, almost unnoticeable red stains near the baseboards of the living room. Mark dismissed these, offering a flurry of excuse faulty paint, spilled cleaning chemicals. By themselves, these bits of evidence might have gone nowhere, but each new peculiarity added to a growing sense of unease. Mrs. Carter's tip proved vital. She described, in detail, the heavy bags she observed Mark loading into his truck in the early hours. She mentioned seeing him scrubbing the driveway with bleach, something that struck her as unusual, especially when no large mess was visible. Combined with other neighbors' accounts of arguments and strange nocturnal activity, investigators acquired a search warrant for the Johnson property. What followed was a meticulous sweep of the home, the vehicles, and every nook and cranny that Mark likely thought he had sanitized. The search turned up more red stains in the carpet, faint and concealed by fresh shampooing. Under the glow of luminol, police found evidence of a violent scene. Tension in the neighborhood soared as news vans lined the block. The once peaceful street of vibrant palm trees and stucco exteriors became the focal point of a suspected homicide investigation. Mark's behavior began to crack under the pressure. His claims of ignorance about Sarah's whereabouts collided with the blood evidence discovered in the family home. Investigators also secured surveillance footage from traffic cameras that revealed Mark driving his truck to remote areas on the outskirts of town in the early hours of the morning after the disappearance. His route was suspicious, leading them to wooded regions where discarded items might be hidden. Piece by piece, the mosaic of Mark's fabricated story fell apart. Soon enough, the search expanded to include these remote sites, culminating in the discovery of incriminating materials. and personal belongings of Sarah and the children. The heartbreak in the once tranquil community deepened, and the last traces of hope that Sarah and her children would return safely faded. For detectives, juggling between Mark's pleas of innocence, the physical evidence, and the mounting testimonies presented a puzzle. Each day, media attention escalated, with tabloids printing headlines that speculated about Mark's involvement. Some stories detailed domestic abuse. Others highlighted Mark's deep financial troubles and rumored affairs. Meanwhile, the local talk radio stations buzzed with theories, dividing the community into those who believed Mark might be innocent and those convinced he had orchestrated a heinous crime. As more evidence emerged, the latter group grew larger. Behind the scenes, investigators pored over bank statements, phone records, and internet searches. They found proof that Mark had researched ways to dispose of evidence, scoured websites about cleaning up crime scenes, and had large cash withdrawals that preceded Sarah's disappearance. Observers of the trial that would follow would later recall the eerie calm Mark displayed in interrogations. One detective described his demeanor as disconnected, as though the accusations did not concern him. He repeated that he had no idea where his family was and suggested they might have run away. Yet when pressed with the glaring inconsistencies nighttime disposal trip, the bleach, the blood in the house, he offered only circular defenses. Investigators played him recordings of neighbors talking about hearing the argument that night, about the heavy bags, about his controlling nature. Still, he kept insisting he was simply misunderstood. After sufficient evidence had been gathered, Mark was arrested on charges of homicide. The community was stunned, though many neighbors admitted it was no real surprise. Given the swirl of stories, Sarah's friends found themselves in tears, deciding they would do whatever possible to honor her memory. Mark's reputation crumbled. His co-workers recounted bizarre instances of seeing him lash out in frustration, cursing about money or belittling subordinates. Some started to connect the dots. Mark's attempts to maintain a polished image often clashed with a rising tide of desperation he couldn't conceal forever. Once the trial began, media coverage soared to sensational heights. Cameras circled the courthouse. News anchors delivered round-the-clock updates, describing each piece of evidence. The prosecution depicted Mark as an individual consumed by paranoia, with a crumbling financial situation and burning resentment towards Sarah, who planned to leave him. They showcased evidence of his late-night disposal route, the newly purchased cleaning materials, phone records showing threatening messages sent to Sarah, and the heartfelt confessions Sarah had made to her friend Megan. During the proceedings, Mark's defense team aimed for a temporary insanity defense. They spoke of Mark's failing investments, the intense stress swirling around his job, and the panic of possibly losing his family. They painted a picture of a man thrown into mental chaos, his mind clouded by a fear he couldn't control. It was a strategy that might have worked if not for the cold, methodical steps Mark took to hide the crime. The evidence was so strong, so precise, that few jurors showed any sign of doubt. His internet searches on disposal methods, the chilling text messages he sent Sarah, and the suspicious items found in remote areas indicated careful planning, hardly the behavior of someone who simply snapped in an uncontrollable rage. Inside the courtroom, friends and members of Sarah's family sat together, often holding hands or wiping away tears as they listened to the horror of her final hours. Noah and Emma's pictures were displayed, drawing sorrowful murmurs and shaking heads. One image, Emma hugging a stuffed bear in her pink bedroom, left the gallery in silence. People could not reconcile the sweet faces of those children with the unspeakable fate that had befallen them. The atmosphere felt suffocating, charged with grief, anger, and an immense longing for justice. Witness after witness took the stand. Megan described Sarah's final weeks, her fear, her plans to leave, and the discovery of Mark's infidelity, which Sarah had described as the last straw. The neighbors recounted hearing shrieks of distress, slamming doors, and incoherent shouts. Then came the forensic experts, who presented blood spatter patterns. They explained how the small flecks of blood on the living room wall matched the pattern of a high-velocity impact, consistent with the violent scene Mark had tried to erase with bleach. The entire narrative was woven with chilling detail, each piece of evidence highlighting how meticulously Mark tried to cover up his actions. As the trial progressed, Mark himself took the stand. Some believed he might attempt a heartfelt confession or a show of remorse. Instead, he offered a subdued performance, adamantly denying any wrongdoing, claiming he had blacked out in moments of stress, thus recalling nothing of the events from that terrible night. The jury listened, but the weight of the evidence seemed insurmountable. Prosecutors reminded everyone of Mark's internet searches, phone records, neighbors' testimonies, and the terrifying final texts he had sent to Sarah. They argued no blackout or single moment of rage could explain the methodical way he disposed of evidence and tried to create a false alibi. In the end, the jury's deliberation, though lengthy, led to the conclusion most people expected. Mark was found guilty on all counts. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. For those who attended the trial from start to finish, many of them traumatized. It served as both a grim conclusion and a partial relief knowing that justice, to some degree, had been served. Outside the courthouse, Sarah's family embraced each other, tears flowing, but with a measure of comfort that Mark could no longer harm anyone. Reporters outside scrambled to capture the reactions, microphones thrust forward. The Johnson family story, once the epitome of the happy Florida dream, had ended in darkness and tragedy. Yet a trial verdict is rarely the close of such a devastating tale. In the weeks following the sentencing, the community searched for ways to heal. Residents used social media to express condolences, some sharing photos of Sarah volunteering at the church, others posting videos of Emma and Noah playing outside on bright, sunny days. The local church held a vigil, placing candles on the steps and inviting neighbors to gather, share memories, and pray. Slowly, the flowers, notes, and mournful messages piled up in front of the Johnson residence. A memorial was placed to keep the memory of Sarah, Emma, and Noah alive and remind passers-by that even the perfect suburban facade could hide unimaginable pain. During this period of mourning, a small group of Sarah's friends and relatives came together, determined to ensure that her and the children's legacies remained vibrant. They decided to create a foundation dedicated to helping victims of domestic violence find safe havens and financial assistance. In that foundation's earliest days, they faced obstacles everything from limited resources to bureaucratic hurdles. Nevertheless, powered by the raw sorrow and anguish of adversity, they pushed through. They had seen firsthand what could happen when a survivor of abuse had nowhere to turn. Some onlookers questioned whether the signs of Mark's violence could have been identified and intervened upon sooner, possibly saving lives. Others reminded people that many victims hide their bruises and emotional scars out of fear or shame. Experts from local crisis centers encouraged the public to learn about red flags in relationships controlling behavior, diminishment of self-worth, and threats that escalate with time. The Johnson case, while profoundly tragic, served as a catalyst for new conversations within this Florida community. In the midst of sorrow, acquaintances and supporters of Sarah found solace in each other, sharing stories, laughter, and tears. They remembered the times Sarah brightened a room just by entering it, or when Emma giggled at silly jokes, or how Noah once offered a cookie to the mailman. These memories were small, almost mundane snapshots of kindness, but they took on a profound weight as people tried to process the cost of this tragedy. The spirit of those who were lost lived on through each reflection, ensuring that the heartbreak was not the only lasting imprint from their lives. Meanwhile, Mark's lawyers filed routine appeals, each one unsuccessful. He remained behind bars, his life now confined to the cold structure of a prison cell. For some, the knowledge that he would remain locked away provided a sense of security. For others, it was a frustrating reminder that there was no perfect closure. Sarah and the children could never be returned to life, and those who loved them would forever carry the scars of their loss. Still, the finality of Mark's incarceration allowed the community to gradually shift its focus towards healing and understanding, rather than being perpetually stuck in a loop of fear and anger. Local journalists continued to write about the Johnson murders and their aftermath, using the story as a case study in domestic violence prevention and psychological escalation. Psychology columnists, in particular, dove into Mark's profile. Some speculated that he had borderline personality traits or narcissistic tendencies, while others recognized the possibility of severe depression aggravated by financial ruin. There were debates about how mental health services could play a role in preventing extreme tragedies. Others argued that all the therapy in the world might not stop a person from acting out their darkest impulses if they refused help. Through such debates, the community found a purpose, channeling pain into learning and prevention. One of the strangest aspects of the case was how Mark's appearance and manner had fascinated so many. He projected a calm authority that seemed at odds with the monstrous crime he committed. In earlier days, some neighbors described him as charming enough in brief encounters, though he spoke sparingly. Perhaps that was why few suspected him initially. This realization left people wary. They questioned how easily they could be fooled by someone's outward demeanor, how appearances truly mean little. Underneath someone's neatly pressed shirts and polite nod could lurk sinister intentions. Through interviews and public speaking events, Sarah's family emphasized that the tragedy should not define Sarah, Emma, and Noah. They wanted the world to remember them not just as victims, but as people who loved, laughed, and had their own distinct identities. Sarah's love for children, Emma's artistic drawings of dolphins and mermaids, and Noah's fascination with toy cars. Each memory was more than a footnote in a murder case. They were actual human stories deserving of remembrance and respect. A television crew from a well-known crime documentary series eventually descended on the neighborhood, filming segments at the Johnson home, the daycare where Sarah worked, and the courthouse steps. They interviewed neighbors who were willing to speak on camera, capturing the emotional reflections of those who felt the shock and heartbreak so personally. Mrs. Carter, the vigilant neighbor who called the police, found herself receiving praise for trusting her instincts. She humbly explained how fear of overstepping nearly kept her silent, and that learning to trust one's gut is crucial. Her actions helped investigators piece together a stronger case earlier than they might have otherwise. Her choice, she said, was driven by an unshakable feeling that something just wasn't right. The documentary captured wide shots of the quiet, tree-lined street and close-ups of the flower-strewn memorial in front of the Johnson house. It was a haunting reminder that tragedy can move in even the most serene pockets of suburban America. The narrator's gripping monologue touched on illusions of perfection, how illusions can lead us astray, and how sometimes the most peaceful of roads can hold swirling storms of resentment and secrecy behind locked doors. The episodes aired nationwide, and viewers around the country responded with sympathy, shock, and calls for more robust resources for victims of domestic abuse. In looking back at the timeline of events, from Mark's financial ruin to the final confrontation, it's clear that a buildup of stress, betrayal, and unwavering control set the stage for tragedy. Yet, as many experts pointed out, not all bankruptcies or difficult relationships end in violence. What turned this scenario lethal was a lethal mix of Mark's obsession with power and a deeply rooted fear of loss. In losing his finances, facing Sarah's potential departure, and struggling with the shame of infidelity, Mark's world crumbled. Instead of seeking professional help or confiding in someone, he allowed his fears to twist into violent desperation. A cautionary tale emerged. If you find yourself spiraling, speak up, reach out, find assistance, because the alternative might lead to irreversible acts. In the wake of the Johnson murders, Community leaders organized workshops and events aimed at raising awareness of red flags in relationships. The local library held lectures by domestic violence counselors. The elementary school where Emma and Noah once played introduced programs that teach children safe ways to reach out for help if they witness unsettling events at home. These steps formed part of the community's pledge to ensure that the Johnson case would not be just another tragic headline, but a turning point for real, meaningful change. The months turned into years, and the Johnson home, which once stood as a beacon of suburban contentment, became known as a house of sorrow. Potential buyers avoided it, and property values in the immediate vicinity wavered. Some families moved away, unable to endure the memory of sirens and forensic teams combing through the place next door. Others remained, determined to reclaim their street's sense of belonging. They planted new flowers and introduced community gatherings, hoping to mend the painful fractures that the tragedy had caused. Renaming the street was even proposed to distance themselves from the dark memories. But in the end, they instead settled on holding an annual neighborhood barbecue in memory of better times, with a portion of proceeds supporting Sarah's foundation. Behind bars, Mark settled into the routines of prison life. Occasional media attempts to interview him usually resulted in perfunctory refusals or odd, contradictory statements about his innocence. In a rare letter that found its way into the hands of a journalist, Mark blamed external factors for the entire ordeal. The economy, Sarah's betrayal, unfair media coverage, and even the neighbors' prying eyes. That letter, published online, ignited a wave of anger from readers who saw it as yet another example of Mark's inability to accept responsibility. If anything, it reinforced the widely held belief that the man who had once seemed so composed and in control was, in reality, a calculating individual who refused to face his own actions. Despite the lingering sadness, the bond that forged among neighbors in the aftermath proved unexpectedly strong. Individuals who had only exchanged a few words over fences now shared meals and conversations. They recognized the fragile nature of life and the urgent need to look out for each other. Children were willfully taught to speak up if a friend or classmate showed signs of distress. The local church established a hotline for anyone in the community experiencing domestic problems. Volunteers staffed it around the clock, ensuring no call went unanswered. Such unity did not erase the pain, but it gave purpose to the heartbreak. Sarah's family began an annual scholarship in Emma and Noah's names. Each year, a student with aspirations in daycare work or child-centered professions fields close to Sarah's heart received the support they needed to pursue education. Through these scholarships, the promise of a better tomorrow sparkled, even in the face of grim recollections. The recipients often wrote heartfelt letters explaining what the scholarship meant to them, describing how they, too, wanted to bring light into the lives of children in need. In these small but poignant ways, Sarah, Emma, and Noah continued to have a presence among the living, inspiring acts of kindness that contrasted the cruelty they had suffered. From time to time, journalists, authors, or producers from streaming services looked to revisit the case. They sought new angles, fresh interviews, or sensational revelations. Sarah's family handled these requests carefully, only consenting to talk when they felt it would help shed light on the broader issues of domestic violence, mental health, and child welfare. They did not want to feed those seeking mere sensationalism. As a result, public knowledge of the Johnson murders deepened, focusing less on the gruesome details and more on the social context that allowed such a monstrous act to take root. For those who lived near the Johnsons, the memory would never fully vanish. Many still recalled Mark standing by his mailbox, half smiling, or Sarah cheerily waving from her minivan. Some nights, older neighbors woke with dreams of hearing Emma and Noah's laughter. A lasting question lingered. Could someone have intervened sooner? Could the tragedy have been prevented if the family had gotten more help? The what-ifs lingered in the air, a haunting echo that might never find resolution. In time, those questions grew quieter, overshadowed by the determination to prevent similar fates in the future. So, what can we learn from this story? It is easy to think tragedy only emerges from obviously broken families. We imagine neighbors with loud, public fights or suspicious activity that nobody can ignore. Yet, the Johnson family seemed calm and content on the surface. The perfect image of suburban life. That perfect image, as we have seen, can hide silent turbulency, a place where underlying issues fester until they turn deadly. Recognizing signs of abuse, whether emotional or physical, and providing safe avenues for reporting or seeking help may save lives. A kind ear, a watchful eye, a willingness to question sudden changes in a neighbor's behavior, these small acts can prove pivotal. In Sarah's final days, she wrestled with fear, worried she had nowhere to go, that Mark's wrath might escalate if she tried to leave. She was right, but the cost of her silence proved catastrophic. For those locked in similar cycles, Sarah's story is both a warning and a plea. Do not wait until it's too late. Friends who suspected the worst, like Mrs. Carter, eventually overcame their hesitation and made the phone call that became the turning point in unveiling the truth. Although heartbreak may not always be avoided, early intervention can provide the best chance for a different, hopefully safer, outcome. Reflecting on Mark's behavior, one sees the seeds of violence in his need for control. Economic downfall became the catalyst for a spiral, and Sarah's realization of his infidelity set off alarm bells. Instead of standing accountable, Mark blamed external forces. The series of decisions he made illustrate how personal desperation can morph into a dangerous sense of entitlement. When illusions about his life cracked, he violently tried to maintain them. It's a cycle all too common in cases of domestic homicide. By raising awareness, we can help survivors escape before desperation escalates into violence. Although the story of Sarah, Emma, and Noah ended in sorrow, their memory shines a light on issues that too often remain hidden. Their family's tragedy became a call to action, galvanizing the community to have courage, speak up, and learn the signs. Out of profound loss emerged a drive to educate and protect, a concerted effort to ensure that fewer families meet the same fate. The foundation that bears Sarah's name stands as a testament to this commitment, holding fundraising events and workshops that connect domestic violence victims to shelters, counselors, and community support. Even today, standing outside the Johnson residence, one can still sense the hush that lingers over the property. It's as though the house itself remembers. Overgrown shrubs and shutters boarded up for a time served as silent witnesses. Some people managed to walk by without glancing, hoping to go on with their day unbothered. Others pause, bowing their heads in reverence. If you came upon the memorial plaque outside, you might read the small inscription, "In memory of Sarah, Emma, and Noah May. Their light shine on." Many visitors leave flowers, some leave stuffed animals. Still others just stand quietly, absorbing the weight of an unthinkable crime. Across the street, Mrs. Carter remains one of the few original neighbors who still lives there, and she's become something of a local legend. Sometimes she sits on her porch, reflecting on the events, her eyes distant. She's been known to volunteer at the local crisis center, telling her story to staff and victims alike, so they can understand that courage can, indeed, save lives. Whenever she sees a hesitant face, she recalls the feeling of uncertainty she felt that early morning, staring out her window at Mark Johnson. She emphasizes how trust in one's instincts, combined with compassion, can make a profound difference. Understanding the truth about the Johnson murders is a lengthy, emotionally taxing process. Yet, in telling this true crime story, our mission is not to sensationalize death, but to shed light on the hidden corners of domestic conflict that can escalate to unimaginable acts. Sarah tried to keep the family intact for years out of love and duty, but Mark's deception and controlling nature overshadowed her good intentions. Torn by heartbreak, she inched toward the door, never anticipating the violence that would ensue. Their children's laughter, once so lively, was silenced in a burst of anger. It's a reminder that the unthinkable can happen even where palm trees sway and the sunshine coaxes out smiles places where life seems safe and ordinary. Everyone who knew the Johnsons is left with echoes of what might have been. Emma could have grown up to become an artist, coloring the world with vibrant drawings. Noah might have pursued his love of cars, perhaps designing the next wave of green vehicles. Sarah might have found a new path, forging a peaceful life away from Mark's toxic influence. Dreams now expired, but by remembering them, speaking their names, and supporting efforts to help others, we cultivate a legacy that transforms pain into something constructive and protective. So, dear viewers, thank you for listening to this long, twisting narrative. We hope it has provided insight into the layers of complexity that underlie seemingly perfect lives. If you or anyone you know is in trouble, do not hesitate to seek help. Call local hotlines, speak to community counselors, or reach out to trusted friends and family. If you suspect something is wrong in a neighbor's home, trust your instincts. Silence, driven by fear of intrusion, can lead to devastating consequences. Act if you can. Even a small gesture might be the difference between life and death. This was our deep dive into the Johnson family tragedy. How a picture-perfect facade eroded into horrifying violence, how a community came together in the aftermath, and how we can learn from the signs that hinted at the possibility of doom. The road to heartbreak was paved with missed chances, unspoken terrors, and hidden truths. Yet from the destruction, we see a renewed commitment to watch out for one another and to speak up for victims who cannot speak for themselves. That is the enduring message we want to leave you with. Thank you for taking the time to join us here at True Crime Atlas. We appreciate your willingness to delve into such a serious and heart-wrenching topic. Without you, these stories and the lessons they carry might remain hidden, allowing history to repeat itself. By subscribing to True Crime Atlas, you help our mission to illuminate real stories, spread awareness, and foster understanding of what it truly means when evil creeps into our everyday lives. We encourage you to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your opinions matter, and engaging with us helps create a community dedicated to understanding these important issues. We look forward to bringing you more important cases, more lessons, and more stories that might just save someone from a terrible fate. Until next time, stay observant, stay compassionate, and remember, there's always more to the story than meets the eye.